Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Nizar Hassan, joined as usual by Benjamin Red after a really long break, man. How are you?
I'm good. Happy 2020, man.
Yeah.
It's a whole new year, so much has happened over the past, month since we've been gone. We're in a new year, but really, everything is sort of the same. It's this weird feeling of deja vu, wait a second. We've done a new season before a year ago, and we were in the exact same place waiting for cabinet formation.
Exactly.
And here we are again.
Yeah. I mean, nothing really life-changing happened, although we had some big news, and we apologize to the listeners who were tweeting at us quite frequently saying, when are you coming back? We just needed a break, like everyone does.
We really needed a break,
Yeah. But now we're coming back for another third season, and it's going to be great.
Refreshed, energized, ready to go. Bring it on, 2020.
Yeah, let's do this. So the biggest story, right? Hassan Diab. How did this guy become the prime minister designate after?
Yeah, literally the week after our last episode of last season, this guy just comes out of nowhere and he gets nominated to be the prime minister. Hassan Diab became the prime minister designate, I believe, on the 19th of December. And it was interesting how this happened because this is not some consensus candidate, which we've had a lot of lately, right? No, this is sort of just March 8th. Hezbollah, Amal, FPM, those guys, right?
Yeah. I mean, we were not expecting a March 8th candidate. Neither of us was on the last episode or the one before it.
It's quite a gamble, yeah.
It's. I still don't believe it that's gonna happen. But anyway, it is they're trying to form a government, and people are taking it seriously. Everyone's taking it seriously, and so Diab was supported by 69 MPs out of 128. So it's just over half MPs. So it shows how weak his mandate is from the beginning, to be honest. And a lot of people did not nominate him or nominated someone else. So we have the Future and the Lebanese Forces and 9 other MPs. They abstained from nominating anyone. And these 9 MPs include Miqati's bloc. They include two naughty FPM MPs, Sham al-Rukuz and Na'mat Frem, who have been kind of taking their own positioning after the revolution started. And you have Osama Saad, the independent MP from the south, and Makhzoumi, the independent MP from Beirut, the billionaire. These people kind of abstained from voting. They did not aim anyone. You have PSP Kata'ib, Michel Mawad, and Nuhad Mashnou naming Nawaf Islam, who is a Lebanese diplomat who was seen to be kind of a candidate that was not accepted by Hezbollah and more approved by the Americans. All in all, Diab's name had not been talked about before because he's not a consensus candidate, and it just immediately emerged as the top name. And suddenly we had the consultations, and the blocs actually voted for his name, so or nominated him. So it was a bit of a shock. And then after that, he announced that actually this is not this is not a theatrical thing. He will form a government. And things took a very different path than I expected, to be honest, with him going around and pushing for a government that can actually receive some popular approval.
Yeah, and I think that we need to dive a lot more into the politics of this. But quickly, though, who the fuck is this guy, right?
Yeah, he's a former education minister, and no one knows him, right? He's not known at all. He's not a high-profile political figure. He's an engineer, was a professor at AUB and the vice president at AUB. And if you know anything about AUB and its politics, you know that when you're vice president, you're quite, well connected, and it's not an easy spot to get at all.
Right.
And the salary is extremely high. It's one of these very, very high positions, probably one of the highest paid positions in Lebanon. Although because he's kind of the AUB figure, although he's nominated by March 8 forces, as we were just saying, he was seen to be the candidate that can appeal to the Americans or not be provocative to the West in general. But let's talk about more fun things that this guy has done, right? He was a minister of education, and he wrote a couple of books about himself.
And about his time during his stint as minister, right?
Yeah. And apparently, according to what we know now, he used the ministry's money to publish at least one of these books. And it's full of pictures of him like just being in things, like being in a meeting. And then the captions reading like Hassan Diab listening to, I don't know who, like a president or a minister saying something like that. And it's just full of those pictures. So basically the Lebanese internet has been full of memes about Hassan Diab with the captions about himself for the last, I don't know how many weeks. It's been really hilarious.
So does that mean that the Ministry of Education then gets the royalties from the sales of those books? Because I'm sure the sales are just like
exactly
off the charts. No, I think that this is also, it sort of like gives you a taste for who this person is, right? Instead of just like looking at this dry resume or CV or whatever. Well, actually, if you do look at this guy's CV, well, it's not dry. It is like 135 pages. And he really gives you sort of a taste of who he is, I think. It has a lot of, I guess, flowery language in it. Just a few selections. I'll read a couple of selections from his 135-page CV. Indeed, how lovely it is to walk amongst people and emanate the scent of your morals. You know, this is like high grade, flowery. I don't really know what he's talking about. I don't know
what it means. I have no idea.
Yeah. I trust that passion is one's autopilot button that will unleash one's true potential. Great stuff. But then I think the more fun stuff is when he talks about himself in his CV, because his CV is just like it's insane. There are sections that should not be in CVs in this guy's CV. And clearly the guy thinks quite a bit of himself. He says, "I have been a seeker of truth since my early days." He says, "In a very strange, clairvoyant way, I always felt since my early school years that I would be successful in whatever I aspire for."
Oh, God.
He says, "I was blessed with an innate sense of wisdom from my early years." Like this guy.
It's actually funny. Maybe he's just being a comedian.
I don't think. Maybe I mean, this is a lot of commitment to this material. Yeah. I would definitely suggest, if you're interested in doing this, you should probably just have like a party where everybody does sort of like a dramatic reading of selected passages, because it actually is kind of entertaining.
Coming back to the politics, you're the numbers guy. Are we late in this process of cabinet formation?
It feels like it, right? It feels like it's been going on forever. And largely that's because it took so goddamn long to designate this guy, right? It took like 51 days just to designate him. As of Monday, when this podcast is coming out, we have been 83 days without a fully empowered government, and it has been only 32 days, though, since Diab was named. So it's actually kind of early in the process, right? If you look at the sort of the recent history, like basically ever since you go back to, say, the 2005 elections, post then, 32 days isn't too long. There was only one cabinet formation, that was Senora in 2005. That was shorter than that at 19 days. And then you've got 44 days, 45 days, then 135 days, 139 days, 252 days, and then 315 days, right? And so, 32 days, that's nothing, right? And to add on to that, Diab himself sort of, like, he's put out this timeline of like about 6 weeks, this 45 days that Senora took in 2008 and Hariri took in 2016 as sort of the goal. Back on the 20th of December, right after he was named Prime Minister designate, Diab promised a government within 6 weeks. So that deadline falls on January 31st, and that would be 43 days since his designation. So sort of like within that, the shorter end of cabinet formations in recent history. Now, another fun thing, speaking of deja vu, though, if he did form it on January 31st, that would be exactly 1 year since the last cabinet was formed. Fun little coincidence there.
So much fun. I love all of these numbers.
But, okay, so basically the idea being, though, the point being, like, this is a relatively, we're still relatively early in the process right now. But on the other hand, it seems very strange that it's taking so long, right? Because it's a one-sided government. It's a March 8th government. They should be able to figure this out really, really quickly, number one. And then number two, there's a huge fucking financial crisis that we're in the middle of. And there's a huge protest movement, the big uprising that we're in the middle of. So you would think that, these sort of like outside pressures would lead the politicians to form a government more quickly, right? But it seems as though, like, no, the politicians are doing what they always do. They're playing the game as they normally do. And it's just going to take, like, we can hope for, like, a short 45-day formation, but maybe not.
And when you look at what's stopping the formation according to all, like, media reports, it's the same old shit of, like, how many ministers each Zaim will get, right? Because Diab has entered this role saying, I will have an 18-member cabinet of experts, of basically technocrats, and this hasn't happened for a long time, right?
Yeah. There's only one other time in independence Lebanon that this has happened. You have to go back to 1960. Saab Salem, he had an 18-member cabinet. And other than that, it's never happened.
But to have this like kind of criterion from the beginning of having an experts-only cabinet is not easy, because you had many people insisting to have political representatives in the cabinet, especially on the March 8th front and on the FPM front. But he kind of managed to convince these sides, apparently, with the idea of having an 18-member experts or technocratic kind of government, despite some resistance from especially Hezbollah and Berri in the beginning. But these experts are not really like independent or anything, because people are demanding a government that's independent from the ruling parties. It's not the case at all.
No, they're like these. What they're talking about, these experts, they're still going to be a part of some Zaim share.
Definitely.
Right?
I mean, they're either the advisors of ministers or people in ministries that were appointed by specific parties or have allegiance to them.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what are they going to do? They're going to listen to the Zaim that appointed them. That's the whole idea. So, I mean, what is the point with this, though? You can sort of like pretend that that's not the case and say, oh, we're doing what the protesters want. We are giving them independent, in quotes, experts. And that's one thing that you can do. But then also, this also gives the politicians this sort of plausible deniability. If things really go bad, if things just take a turn for the worse and the country, really goes to shit or something, then they can just discard these nobodies, right? These experts. They can blame everything on them and then say, oh, no, well, this is why we need politicians to be in charge, because we can actually do things.
I still don't believe that this will ever be a good argument for them, but I understand and I kind of agree with you, but I think that it will not work in the future if this happens. It's just that they will have fall guys not representing the same ministers, because people now are focusing on who the politician is. So it's very important that it's not Gibran Bassil himself who gets like blamed, or Ali Hassan Khalil himself, or whoever from any party. So that's why they need people who are lower profile and without a lot of political ambition. Like the Prime Minister himself, maybe. I mean, he does have a lot of ambitions according to his CV, but we don't expect him to have a lot of political ambition.
Yeah, so like one of the reasons that has been put out there why they haven't been able to get their shit together and get a cabinet together is this idea, and we don't know, right? Like, this is behind closed doors, smoke-filled rooms, kaza. But there's this idea that it's probably over a blocking third for Gibran Bassil.
Shocking.
Does that sound familiar to anyone? That was the entire point of like the 252 days that we, spent trying to form the last government. So there is sort of like a precedent for this, if this is the case. And it seems like it could be the case. We have reportedly had things where, Frangia reportedly wanting 2 seats instead of just 1 for his Marda movement. The SSNP reportedly wants a minister. And then on the other side, we have Talal Arslan, who is allied with Gibran Bassil, trying to claim the industry ministry for himself or for his party. And then also saying, that there should be a second Druze seat or second seat for the Druze sect. Which, by the way, if you go back to the 1960 government of Saab Salem, well, there actually were 2 Druze. There was Majid Arslan and Kamal Jumblat in that government. So that was pretty tough, not exactly comparable, but Arslan does have this historical precedent on his side.
But this whole thing shows you kind of how disconnected they are from what people are concerned about and what people want in the streets. Like, I haven't heard anyone talking about the Druze share in cabinet as a serious concern for a pretty long time, because no one gives a shit really who is in cabinet as much as what they will do there, especially in this moment of uprising and this moment of high anxiety and crisis. So it just shows how the politicians, and it's so disappointing to see all of these parties like being like such idiots politically, by going into these details for the short term. We all know that this government, if it will last for a short time. Like the longest it could last is till the next election, which is in a couple of years. So it's not like you will benefit so much from having one ministry in this doomed cabinet. Why are you fighting so much for it? And, what are you really getting out of this? It just shows really that they are in a completely different place than the rest of us who are protesting every day for the basic rights and going to the banks and waiting in long lines, etc.
Yeah, right, exactly. And just as weird also, I keep coming back to this, fact that this is, it's a one-sided government, it's a March 8th government. Future LF, PSP, they've all said we will not participate in this government. So it should be really, really easy for them to form it, even according to like the old rules, right? But they still aren't able to do that. And now we're hearing word of like, oh, well, maybe it won't be 18 members of cabinet. Maybe it'll be 20 or 24 to sort of like, I guess, cut all of the sides in that you have to cut in order to make this law, this government that is not going to last a whole long.
Yeah, and then in a couple of weeks it will be 30, and then we're back to square one.
Right.
It's completely ridiculous.
So I think that's the wrap for the political stuff, like the cabinet formation stuff. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that went on that we need to like bang through really quickly. It didn't happen in Lebanon, but it affects Lebanon quite a bit. Major General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in Baghdad over the holidays by the U.S. They did it. They claimed it. They said, yep, we took him out. And that's a huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the whole world was talking about it. It was not like a local thing in any sense. It created this whole panic about World War III, etc. And in Lebanon as well, people were worried that this means that, okay, in addition to all the misery we're currently living in, we will be going into a war, a major regional war. And it was a shock to most people. It was not something that was expected or anything. And Hezbollah grabbed the opportunity very well, and it used it to mobilize in a way that it couldn't mobilize before during this time of popular uprising, with a lot of billboards. It's just incredible how many billboards and photos and how many broadcasts on TV and radio they've been making about Qasem Soleimani. And Nasrallah himself made like a big speech in which he did what Bush did in 2001, if you remember, when he said, you're either with us or against us, you're either with us or with the terrorists. It was an opportunity for Hezbollah to say, if you're with the axis of resistance, you're on the right side of history. If you're not, then you are with the imperialists and the Americans and the Zionists, etc. And any third kind of way or any other positioning is either that you are ignorant and confused, or that you are waiting to see which one will win and join that side. So, an opportunist. So basically Nasrallah was kind of re-establishing the political identity of his large circle of support, especially when we're talking about a speech that a lot of people were listening to, right? Because they want to know whether Nasrallah will actually say that Hezbollah will respond from Lebanon. This was the biggest concern. So his main purpose out of the speech was to establish this identity as, the axis of resistance, and that, affiliation to Hezbollah and allegiance to Hezbollah is much bigger than a local issue, etc. The real concern, as I was saying, was whether Hezbollah will respond, and he made it clear indirectly that it will not, by saying that the real retaliation to this to the attack and the assassination of Soleimani should be by kicking out all U.S. troops out of this region, out of the Arab MENA region. And this meant that Lebanon doesn't have a big role to play in this, because we don't have any U.S. army bases in Lebanon. But we did in Iraq, because it was just before the Iraqi parliament passed the law to kick the U.S. troops out of Iraq. And we do have in all of these Gulf countries. So he's saying that this is a regional battle, but he also kind of reassured us that it's not going to happen now in Lebanon, that we're not going to have a war with Israel or whatever. And the Iranian retaliation came soon after, with attacks on the U.S. army bases in Iraq. And they said that this was it. This is our retaliation. That made everyone here, say, okay, great, we won't have a regional war. So it's more or less kind of this big concern that took over. We were relieved of this concern quite quickly after.
Yeah, and can I just make one tiny comment on this? And that is that Nasrallah, in doing this and saying like, oh, no, we are not going to attack civilians. We are going to, our aim is to eject the U.S. military from the Middle East. In doing that, he seems very reasonable, very statesmanlike. I think he did a very good job, and he's very, very good at doing this thing where he is the rational actor he is the bigger man in the room, especially when it's up against like him versus Donald Trump or something. You know, he looks very, very good in comparison. He looks very rational. He looks very level-headed and very fair, as opposed to.
And he did say something like, "No attacks on civilians are acceptable, and we will only target." He said like it's only that the U.S. Army that should be targeted or kicked out. We're not talking about U.S. civilians. So he was pretty clear, so that no one interprets the speech as saying, you know, he wants to kill all the Americans in the region or whatever.
Right.
It was a well-crafted speech.
Right. Also, we had just a few days earlier than that, we had somebody kind of famous pop up here in Lebanon, Carlos Ghosn, who is of Lebanese descent.
The pride of the nation.
Yes. He popped up in Lebanon on December 30th after fleeing Japan, where he's charged with financial malfeasance while he was the head of Nissan. Lots of great reporting on this has happened. You know, it's just like this fascinating spy thriller almost, you know, how he got out of Japan and escaped the security and all this stuff. But there's one thing that I just want to like pick out. Once they get to Lebanon, there's, at least in some of the international reporting, there's this sort of like line about like how Ghosn is like this very popular figure here, well respected and beloved. Maybe. Like he was a Lebanese guy who went to achieve astounding success. And so there is that. I don't know really the depth of that though. And now especially that he is on trial for corruption in Japan and he has skipped bail.
Yeah.
It looks absolutely terrible. Right now we're in a moment here in Lebanon where everybody is rising up against a bunch of corrupt businessmen who have been running the country for the past 30 years, fabulously wealthy people. And now this guy comes who is credibly accused of corruption. He pops up, and my sense of all of this is that he may not be quite so just blindly beloved as some of these reports make him out to be here in Lebanon.
What are these reports based on anyway? Are they based on like one Twitter trend or like a couple of billboards that...
On the billboards, I'm sure,
Yeah, we are all Carlos Ghosn, the stupid campaign that sponsored by very wealthy and very high people in our state or whatever, like trying to endorse this figure. But what he actually represents is something that people are revolting against, as you're saying. So
and it is very clear that he has, you know, some ties to the elite here. It seems to me as though like he is basically the problem that everybody is revolting against. Yeah. And so he may have come back to a friendly jurisdiction where, you know, justice can be bought in a lot of cases. But as far as the sentiments of the people, I would take strong issue with this idea that he's like some sort of like beloved, favored son of the country or anything.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. And he wouldn't have arrived in Lebanon if not for a very meticulous conspiracy, right? I mean, doesn't happen like it's not a normal process to escape from Japan, to go through Turkey and come to Lebanon without your passports because they're with your lawyers and everything is working smoothly, and then you arrive in Lebanon and no one is prosecuting you. It's a whole story that happened with the consent, obviously, of people in very high positions because it risks diplomatic relations between Lebanon and another country. So we all know there are big heads involved in this operation, and nothing is done for free in this country.
Yeah. Quick update on the financial situation. We're recording this on Saturday. As of today, Saturday, the lira was trading at around 2,250 to the US dollar. This is according to LebaneseLira.org. Now, earlier in the week, the exchange rate flirted with about 2,500, which it is a big number, right? That's sort of, to go back to history, like that's sort of getting into crisis of 1992 territory when the lira hit its lowest value ever. According to BDL, in September of 1992, the lira averaged 24.20. According to other sources, you know, like the average is one thing, but it spiked up above that, up above 2,800 that month, according to Semi Barudi, an academic. And so we are getting to the level basically where the lira is sort of at these 1992 levels, like peak crisis levels. All right, so I just want to put these numbers in perspective really quickly. For those of you who maybe don't have lira bank accounts that are affected by this, your savings maybe is in dollars or not in the country. Let's say you have 30 million Lebanese lira in the bank. For the past 22 years, that has meant you've got about $20,000, right? That's at the peg 1,500 to 1. But once you get up to 2,000, you only have $15,000. That's 25% less. You just lost $5,000 of your $20,000, right? At the current rate, 2250 to 1, then you have just 13,330. That's a 33% decline in whatever your savings is. And then at 2,500 to 1, what we had last Monday, you have just $12,000. That's a 40% drop. So imagine these people with their life savings is now, a third less than what it used to be, or 40% less.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of a friend you are, because I just told you before we started recording that all my savings are in Lebanese pounds. And you go into this whole description of how much I've lost, like 40%. I know that, man. It's painful. Just stop talking about it. Let's go.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just very painful, to say the least. And I'm glad I'm not like 70 and not able to work anymore.
Right, exactly. Also, banks are still putting severe limits on withdrawals, both in dollars and lira. And despite this, there appears to be just like this continuing run on the banks. Like people keep going to the banks, keep going to the ATMs, withdrawing as much as possible, every day or every week or however often they can.
Yeah, it's usually $200 or something around that per week from your USD accounts. And each bank has a different rule. Like sometimes you can't get anything off the counter. You have to go to the ATM. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. So you might wait for 2 hours and then get to the desk and they say, "Oh, no more dollars for today."
Yeah,
it's quite chaotic and very, very.
It's
long
infuriating.
queues,
It takes a whole lot of time. I know this because I took my money out of Bank Med, my lira cash out of Bank Med recently, and it was took me basically a month to do it. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so there's like definitely this, rising tide of frustration against the banks for multiple reasons, but this is one of them, right? The banks are not doing their job. You can't get the money that is your money. And so what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted a while back that they are now Lebanon's, like, the public enemy number one in Lebanon. I'm quite convinced that it's the case. It's basically the side that everyone hates, even like people who usually have no problem with the banks because they have a lot of money. If not, they're not able to, get exceptions and move some money out of the country now or withdraw a lot of cash. They also hate the banks. So it's basically a whole lot of frustration, as you're saying. And we're seeing it in the kind of protests recently, the nature or the direction that the protests are taking. Before the end of last year, we had some protests, like since our last episodes, we had some protests, but they were not very active before the New Year. On New Year's Eve, obviously, we had a big celebration. By the way, 2019 saw like a very, very, very large number of collective actions, according to the Civil Society Knowledge Center, which maps all collective actions that happen in the country. We had 2,107 collective actions in 2019. That's 12 times more than the year before. And we're talking about only 3 months where the uprising was happening, right? Because it started in October. So it was a big like phenomenon. This uprising that we see is just confirmed now with data and numbers. And road blockades turned out to be the most popular form of action, with over 1,000 collective actions taking that form. Anyway, to go back to kind of the banks, there's been more and more directed actions against, this public enemy number one. And we saw some serious escalations last week with a protest on Tuesday at the central bank. Basically, a lot of people have been protesting at the central bank since the beginning of the uprising because they see that, the role of the central bank and its alliance with the commercial banks in Lebanon has been very counterproductive to the economy and to the middle and poor classes in the country.
But it's been great for the bank owners, who also happen to be tied to politicians.
Yeah. So it's basically a protest that has been going on for a long while, but there's more interest in focusing on that now among many groups and organizations. And on Tuesday, so there was a protest at the central bank. One of the protesters kind of tried to climb into this, beyond the siege or whatever you call it. And then police attacked him very violently, and then police started attacking protesters, and then, as usual, all of the tear gas, the military grade, very suffocating, very annoying tear gas that they use, the same shit that they use in downtown, they used in Hamra. They were following protesters through the street. So protesters were retaliating by destroying the facades of the banks in the street. So they were not touching any other shops, to be very clear. It was not a riot. In riots, you see anything broken and people looting and stealing things from shops. This was not happening. people just destroyed the glasses, the kind of the ATM machines and the facades of the banks. And they used, in order to do that, they used the signs of, the public signs, like, you can't park here. Whatever. So it's basically symbolic. It's ironic that, they use the state property to destroy the oligarchs, the private oligarchs' property. But it was not a real riot that could, threaten to go into to lead to any kind of civil strife or chaos or anything. But still, police was reacted in an extremely aggressive way, like with a very heavy hand. At least 53 people that night were arrested, and most of them, only 4 were released, and the rest were kept overnight. By arrested, I mean detained. I mean, I don't know how many of them had charges from the public prosecutor. But anyway, they were kept in jail in the police station overnight. And then the next time, actually before that, during the arrest in Hamra, the police even went into a cafe that is known to be pro-revolution, and they arrested the workers there. And the workers have nothing to do with, they are foreign workers and they were just working, and they have nothing to do with the protests or the riots against the banks. But now they're referring them to the general security, and they have charges because of their, obviously, residence status or whatever, their papers.
It's ridiculous.
Very ridiculous. So the next day we had a major protest in Second Al-Hello, major police station, and some protesters, when they were marching here, they also kind of destroyed some ATM machines and facades of banks. And it was quite calm for the first couple of hours, but then, as expected, same thing happens. People start throwing, water bottles and things like that, sometimes fireworks. And then police at a certain point makes a decision to go in with a heavy hand. And that's what they did. They attacked, and then they arrested more than 16 people, beating them up while arresting them. This is all recorded on video. Like, I don't even need to say allegedly. Like, we saw all of this, and I was down there anyway. I was seeing it.
Right.
One person was hit on the back of her head. She has temporary memory loss and sight loss as well. She's in a very critical condition. Many people were injured because of the very aggressive way, including the press. Police attacked the press violently, including local press and international press. So they were completely out of control.
Just absolutely, just things that are not acceptable under any circumstances.
And we had the same old story of back and forth between protesters and the police. A lot of tear gas for the rest of the night. And then we heard statements from both the head of the Internal Security Forces, General Ahmad Othman, and Raya Al-Hassan, our caretaking interior minister. And both statements were basically saying the same thing, you should excuse the policemen, they're under so much pressure and they're subjected to a lot of violence. Although the attacks on the media are not justifiable, but the infiltrators among the protesters are causing all of this. And Othman went on this mathematical thing where he's basically saying, we have 1,000 troops in the riot police. Since the beginning of the uprising, we've had almost 500, so around 450 injuries among this police force. So now a third of the police force, of the riot police force, is injured. Yeah, no, it's not that. That's not how it works. First of all, injuries do not last 3 months unless they're very, quite severe. Second of all, they might be the same people who get injured, and in any case, that's just an exaggeration to say that riot police is under such a grave physical damage.
Yeah, how can we expect them to behave responsibly and professionally? No, it's their job to do this.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. That's the whole point of security forces. They're supposed to be trained so that they can handle the pressures.
I mean, and they are so protected. From what? From fireworks and rocks? I mean, they have full masks. They have even gas masks. They have these shields that they carry all the time with the stick, and they have a little armor on their body. What else do you need for the very basic kind of white weapons that the protesters are using? Water bottles and rocks and stuff like that, and fireworks. So it's just putting them as the victim. The riot police is the victim when they're clearly extremely aggressive and disproportionate in their response.
It is interesting though that this aggression comes out when it's the banks that are being attacked.
Yeah, that's the most important point. It's just so painful for the ruling elite to see the banks being attacked, the icon of the bank and the symbolism of the bank and the interest that they have in the banking sector. They don't want to give people the green light to go further with these attacks because they can't accept that the banks are prone to such,
Right.
Such humiliation. Although, if you just experience any of the humiliation that everyone in Lebanon is experiencing with the banks, you would say this is the least like the least
Yeah.
possible acceptable damage that the banks can handle. Like, how much does it cost to repair your whatever facade? Like $10,000. You're causing much more, much bigger problems, much bigger impact on the Lebanese economy and people's livelihoods every single day.
Yeah, yeah. Not to mention these banks like regularly redo their facades, every few years, like a new design for the bank, new logo and everything. So it's like, and that's like across the country. So like a few branches, that's not a lot.
Yeah, but
Drop in the
still,
bucket
it's
for them.
kind of it's something that has divided public opinion. Not everyone agrees that we should endorse these attacks. Yeah, I mean, in the Hamra incident, we had the factor of, apart from the violence itself, we had the factor of Hezbollah and Amal supporters being there and talking to TV and saying, we support Birri and Nasrallah. That happened, but these were not really the protesters who were destroying the banks or anything. They were just a few people who were there to attack protesters, the media, and maybe to attack some public property, but they were not the people who did those bank riots. But some people quickly kind of slid into this judgment of saying all of these people are Hezbollah and Amal people. They are the thugs. They are not the real rebels, because the real rebels will never do this. And with all the kind of classist undertones of this rhetoric of the rebels are more civil or civilized, or whatever the word they use is.
Yeah.
Too civilized to do this, and they don't cover their faces. Oh yes, they do. I mean, people who were destroying the banks are people who have been protesting, and part of groups that have been protesting since day one of the uprising. They're not like newcomers or anything, and they're not some infiltrators. It's just serious anger against the banks, and it's quite political. It's a very directed action to say, okay, I'm going to destroy this bank and I'm not going to touch the shop next to it.
Yeah, yeah. And one that I think carries quite a bit of popular support. Yes, you do have these people who are saying, no, we don't want to do that. They're not the true rebels. They're infiltrators, all that stuff. But then you have the person who tried to go to the bank to withdraw some money or to find out why the bank isn't servicing some loan or something like that and got shot down earlier that day. I bet that they sympathize when that bank gets smashed up.
I mean, it brings us back to the question of what is violence, right? If someone says, okay, now I control your money, I'm not going to give you any of it. Is this violence or not? I mean, yeah, he's not beating you up, but still, he's controlling your livelihood. So who protects people against this violence? No, I'm not saying that violence should be responded to with violence, but I'm saying the standard of what is something that is a violent action or an aggression is not always so consistent morally. And also politically, I mean, the banks are the oligarchs in this country, right? They have controlled the economic policy. They have stopped the state from making any progressive economic policy at any moment by their various tools, until very recently, when now they're just trying to make sure that they don't collapse as a sector, right? But you remember in 2014 when people were demanding a ranks and salary scale, like salary increase for public sector workers and teachers, the banks went on strike because the government was going to increase in the budget, was going to increase the tax on the profits from interest rates on bank deposits from 5 to 7%, already extremely low, right? From 5 to 7%. This 2% made them go on strike, and they basically stopped the whole country from having the normal economic activity. And then later on, if you remember in the beginning of last year, when Ali Hassan Khalil said, yeah, we're considering debt restructuring, they made him basically make a speech and say it's off the table.
Right.
They're basically preventing anything that we need to have in terms of policy from happening. And they are very connected. And according to many studies, and we know this, we know the shares, we know who is a member on which board, they are very connected to the political elite. So it's a very valid political target. The battle against the political elite and the banks is not really two, it's one battle.
Right, and to add on to that, this is the sector that has been making billions of dollars in profits throughout these past years, while the rest of the country has been not doing nearly so well. I want to say in 2018, the banking sector overall made something along the lines of $2.4 billion in profits, which is right there. That should tell you, wait, how does the financial sector make money when the rest of the economy isn't? We should have known back then, right, that there was something very, very wrong with things. Yeah. But it worked to the bankers' advantage. It worked to the elite class's advantage. And now they've lost that advantage because this financial model that they were using has been revealed to be bullshit. And they're sort of circling the wagons and saying, oh, no, well, we need to protect what we have. We need to make sure that, we can sort of like ride this out. We'll give people $100 or $200 a week or something, and we can just force them to live off that for right now. Meanwhile, if somebody gets frustrated and smashes up our bank, we will not stand for that.
Yeah, I mean, when the banks are arbitrarily imposing these capital controls, extremely regressive capital controls, causing like businesses to close down, people to come back from where they're studying abroad because their parents can't like move money abroad for their tuition, all of this mess happening, people not surviving, not being able to afford their basic needs, and then the state doing nothing about it, and the central bank governor saying, I can't do anything, it should be a law from parliament to impose official capital controls, and basically parliamentarians not doing anything about it. So when it's the time of normal capital accumulation, they're happy, and then when the crisis comes, they can do whatever they want with us, and the state will not protect us. If your state is not protecting you in a time like this, who will protect you? You have to fight back in a way or another. It's not a question of like what tactic you use. If it's like you can't boycott the banks, that's not a tool you can use because your money is there. So if you boycott them, they're just confiscating more of your money. So you need to do something to kind of hurt them in a way. And this is the most obvious kind of reaction or retaliation.
Yeah. And if you're one of these rulers, what do you do? Just expect like nothing to happen? Do you really expect that? The politicians aren't going to do anything. The bankers aren't going to do anything. Nobody's going to do a goddamn thing, and we're just going to expect everybody to just sit back and take it and not get angry? That's really stupid. That is unbelievably stupid to think that.
Yeah, and one last thing is basically it sets the conflict the way it should be, like between people and the oligarchs. It's basically filling a vacuum that could be exploited by right-wing people to mobilize people against each other, to cause further divisions in Lebanese society along sectarian, or more importantly, I don't know what you call it, national lines, scapegoating of refugees and migrants, which we have been seeing very explicitly in the last 2 years. So it is progressive in a sense to reorient the conflict between the people in general, the 99% and the 1%, then make room for all of this discourse that might come up, fueled and sponsored by the oligarchs themselves, to incite people against each other. So in a sense, yeah, it's taking us in the right direction, in my opinion. Even if a lot of people disagree on the tactics, it shouldn't be really questioned, neither morally nor strategically, that this is at least not bad, at least it's not counterproductive. It's just a bit of deterrence, a bit of a balance of power between us and the banks.
Right. I think that we're in for a wild ride this year, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's exciting. I mean, it's very dark. It seems bleak with no horizons for like improvements. But we don't know what's gonna happen, right? We don't know if this government actually will be formed or not. We might even see early elections. Namat Frem, the former FPM MP, is talking about early elections now because the government will not represent people's interests or the revolution. So we'll see. Anything can happen this year. But yeah, we're off to an interesting start.
All right. Season 3, 2020. Here we come.
Yay.
All right. And we will be back with another episode next week. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.